A lot of work goes into making a video game, especially a non-shitty one, so I'm going to take you back to the past with some people who don't suck ass and who brought you the ultimate nerd experience. Are you nerd enough to learn the shocking truth of AVGN 1&2 Deluxe?
How did the original Angry Video Game Nerd game come to be? Well, we have this show on the internet called the Angry Video Game Nerd, which is about video games, so we thought it'd be a good idea to make a game about it.
Yeah, so I actually made the game of Manos, The Hands of Fate, considered one of the worst movies ever made. And I'd been in game dev for in amateur game dev for a long time before that, and I'd only just started doing it commercially. And I wanted to make a game of Manos, The Hands of Fate. I joked with my friend about, imagine if we made a game of Manos. What was going through my mind was, like, how would I make a game of Manos, The Hands of Fate? Because we found that movie was public domain. It had never been correctly copyrighted, so I was like, I could do that as one of my games that I release. And at the time, I'd been watching a ton of AVGN because I'm a huge fan, and this was way back in early 2010s. And it just came to mind the way that these 8-bit games used to adapt movies, right? You get the film, and the things that were in the film, how you would turn them into a game, was so weird on these old NES games. And the nerd used to really point them out. Things like, oh, remember that from the movie? And things like the Back to the Future episode and the Nightmare on Elm Street and things like that. And just watching all this AVGN, and the whole time I was like, man, I would love to make an AVGN game. And I had feedback with Cinemassacre and with the guys that worked on it originally.
So Sam Beddoes, FreakZoneGames, developed the game. It was great working with him because we would never really have to hover over him or anything because he was a fan of the show, and without us even having to ask, he would just design the game in a way that when we saw it, we were happy with it and didn't really have to, worry about changing too much because he already got it. He already understood what to do, so he was great.
In the end, we got started and made the game, and I think it was a great time.
So why did the second game come to be? Because, we had already done the first game and people really enjoyed it. It got a good reception, so figured why not do another one?
So why were the games remade? What were they thinking?
I've always been a fan of the AVGN games since Screw Attack and Sam worked on them. And, when Screenwave started making games, I knew that this was one that I wanted to remaster.
The first game came to PC first, and then later it came to the Wii U and the 3DS, so we did get a Nintendo release. And the second game then only came to PC and didn't move on to consoles because of all kinds of complications at the time, businesses merging and all kinds of things like that. And it's just unfortunate that it wasn't able to get a release for all kinds of reasons.
The rights to AVGN ended up being available when I was in Florida. So I actually did the first call to make this happen and to make AVGN happen in Animal Kingdom at the bar there. And I sat there for 2 hours and everybody there probably thought I was crazy. But the big thing is it was a long time since the games came out. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if AVGN was on every console? Wouldn't it be great if I could play it on, because I feel like consoles now are kind of evergreen. Like, the Xbox Marketplace is going to be around for a while, so I knew that now was the time to do a remaster because the game would last a long time and be available forever, potentially.
We were just going to take the first game and the second game and put them together and sell it, put it on new consoles, but just to make it available. And over the course of that discussion, I think over the course of about an hour, we realized that we really needed to do something a little more. We needed to do something to kind of, elevate the material a little bit, especially because it had been broken up into these two games over a big stretch of time between when Sam had worked on the first one and the second one. And he'd gotten a lot better at just making games in that amount of time.
We actually decided that we were going to take all of AVGN 1 and port it into AVGN 2's engine. But really what ended up happening is we ended up rebuilding the whole thing in Unity. And that really allowed us to do a lot of the things that you see in the game. And it really set a foundation for us to add to what was there in the first place.
We redid the backgrounds, we upgraded all kinds of things and made both games largely enhanced, almost like Super Mario All-Stars level.
The idea kind of started to percolate of, okay, well, if you were to go back, if we were to give you the time to go back and change things or maybe improve stuff that you felt like you didn't have time to do the first time, what would that look like?
We had some difficulty balancing issues with the original release, which I think could have been a little better. The game was infamous for how difficult it was, and that's a great thing. But there's also, there were times where you could just see that the frustration was a little too much. So I suggested a few changes, which they approved, and we also went back to Cinemassacre to get their input on what they would change as well, and so we followed up on that.
So there was quite a few things in the original game that I wasn't 100% okay with after going through and playing the original games. I'll give one example of some of the changes that I made here with Deluxe. In the stage Happy Time Funland, whatever it's called, the end boss is a unicorn, or it was in the first game. And I was like, what? From the show, where's there a unicorn? And I was thinking to myself, the only thing I could think of from the whole AVGN show where there's a reference to a unicorn is in the Bugs Bunny episode where he says, I'd rather, shove my head up a unicorn's asshole.
This game is garbage. I'd rather put my balls in a crocodile's mouth while shoving my head up a unicorn's asshole.
And that's such a throwaway sort of line. I was like, that doesn't really, people aren't going to recognize that. So we got rid of the unicorn, and instead we added in the Bloodstain bears because that's actually from an episode. And Sam did a great job making, the sprites look cool and everything. But my favorite part of it is in the background, he has the head of the unicorn on a stake, which is kind of how I felt about the original thing. So I'm glad it's on a stake. Another example I can give is there's a stage with ninjas, and I wanted that to be a little bit more like the Ninja Gaiden episode. But basically through this whole Deluxe game, I came in to kind of get everything to be a little bit more on brand compared to the first game. Even though I did drawings and stuff for the first game, I wanted to have a little bit more involvement here to really keep it to be closer like references to what you'd see in the show.
So I wasn't involved too much in building AVGN Deluxe or anything, but I helped in the terms of, because I helped produce and edit Angry Video Game Nerd for the last several years, I was able to incorporate a lot of the things we were doing, like adding Fred Fucks and doing stuff like that into the game, so it has one overarching story that connects to the actual show.
In the original release, I made Fred Fucks look like me because I'm the guy that made the game, but for Deluxe, I made him look like Fred Fucks did in the show and kind of speak like him as well.
So we had to come up with an entirely new plot as to why these two things happen next to each other, what carries them over, and that's why you see a lot of the changes that we wound up making to the game. A lot of them seem arbitrary until you actually get into it, and it was all done to line up this sort of overarching narrative of Fred Fucks figuring out that, okay, he was able to pull the nerd into his video game world in the first game, and the nerd escaped. Well, now the video game world has been spread into the real world, and the nerd has to undo that. And
the other thing was getting everything to feel like really nicely balanced without losing that famous challenge for the game. Something I said early on a lot was, AVGN is a really challenging game, but anybody should be able to take on that challenge. And I don't mean by removing or dampening the challenge, but I mean by just making it an accessible but tough challenge. And things like, for example, the normal difficulty and the easy difficulty now both have infinite lives. People would get to the point early on in the stage Castlevania, and they would get to like a death block tunnel, and they've got 30 lives to start each stage with, and they would use up a lot of those lives in that section, and then they get to the boss and they would have 2 lives, 2 attempts at that boss, and then they'd have to do it all again, and everybody would just check out, a lot of people.
First and foremost, Sam Beddoes from FreakZoneGames, if you're watching this, you are a fucking asshole. And I say that because I've never raged so hard at a video game for several years. I went into Mike Matei levels of screaming at the goddamn game. It was just so frustrating, so congratulations on that. I beat all 3 games on the old school difficulty.
The old school difficulty and higher can give that option, whereas the normal difficulty now can be accessible to people who are fans of the nerd but aren't necessarily expert gamers. Because I found you look at games like Celeste and Super Meat Boy, they are hard as nails. I would say parts of Celeste are far harder than anything in AVGN, but you just get those little extra bits of accessibility. For example, the infinite lives. If you have an unlimited number of tries at something, then you're going to get it eventually. And as long as we have little things like, for example, photosensitivity mode, right? Because a flickering screen shouldn't stop you from being able to take on a challenge because you have photosensitivity issues, things like that. But also, I do think that having unlimited tries helps a lot with stuff. But if you're old school, you can play on old school and have that game over screen looming over you.
And I gotta say, I'm so happy that Sam was able to go back, because a lot of people had issues with the first game when it first came out. Screw Attack helped with it and made the game as hard as possible. 1 for replay value, but 2 because they wanted a game that challenged them as, you know, hardcore video game retro gamers. So I'm glad that with Screenwave and everything going on now, we're able to let Sam go back and remake the games how he envisioned them. So, like, you know, they're still hard, but now there's different difficulty options to, you know, depending on your play style. Of course, as I said, I beat them all on old school and it was very frustrating, but it was an enjoyable experience and I'm glad we're able to make that happen.
The greatest challenge with the AVGN remaster was deciding where to stop. Because as we started working through it and looking at what we had in the first game and what we had in the second game and everything that we wanted to add, we just had so many ideas as to where we would go. You know, I met with Mike, I met with Sam, and you could see as we made our wish list of all the things we wanted to do, it just kept piling on. So the hardest thing was really deciding where we were going to stop and what we were going to hold on for future releases.
The biggest development challenge is probably an equal tie between adding in things that weren't in the first games that you just need for a console submission. You need translations, you need, you know, localization for all the achievements. There's some options that always have to be in there that relate to just how the console works. And a lot of the back-end stuff for that is pretty involved. It takes a lot of time to put in there. It takes a lot of time to get tested and implemented. And because the first game and the second game hadn't really accounted for any of that being in there, it was a lot of work we had to do on the back end to make it able to do that.
But what's with that new 3rd chapter? How the hell did I end up in hell?
So I kind of blindsided everyone with the 3rd chapter. We were already in production of the game and we had already started doing the porting from GameMaker to Unity. And I was like, you know what? We really need to add something new so people feel like they're getting value. Because I knew a lot of fans had bought the first game, had bought the second game. And I was like, what are we going to give those people that are already involved with the games? And I was like, we got to do a 3rd chapter. It has to be big, it has to be epic, and it has to cap off what happened in the other 2 games. So really it came down to getting Mike in a room, sitting down with the whiteboard, and just coming up with what's the craziest thing we can do with this concept. And that was the 3rd chapter, the Tower of Torment.
So what we wanted to do this time around, since the game is going to be on Nintendo Switch, is go back and put in some new things for the people that have, you know, already played the game or just going to play the game for the first time, to give people something brand new. You know, besides the new game engine and the new graphics and the new bosses and all that, I wanted to have a whole entire new area. So that's what we did in the new Final Tower.
You know, the Tower of Torment is the 3rd chapter, which you unlock if you beat both games. It's short, but it's sweet. And man, it's sweet. Firstly, Cinemassacre and Screenwave, they had meetings and things and drawing boards and ideas, which they brought over to me, and then I interpreted into level designs. And the ideas they brought were like, at first I was like, what? Okay, I get like that these are ideas, but I don't know how to make them work. And that was a big challenge.
And usually when this happens, you have a bunch of people throwing out a whole bunch of ideas, and then you winnow them down and you try to figure out which ones are viable and which ones are going to take too much work or wouldn't really work in the engine. And this is one of the few situations in my life I've ever been in, like a pitch meeting like that, where every single idea we came up with found its way into that final tower in some form.
But I love what came out of it, because they sent me pictures of a drawing of like a castle which is floating like a tower, and they said first we have a stage when you're jumping across rocks to get to the castle, and then we have a stage where the big rigs truck is chasing you, and then the big rigs truck is chasing you in reverse at hyper speed. And then we have a stage which is mostly vertical platforming.
I wanted it to be something that I would personally really enjoy, and I like wall jumping in video games. So this new tower, has the nerd basically wall jumping up this tower. I like stuff like Shovel Knight, Spectre Knight with the tower, and Micro Mages, and even the NES Batman, at the end when he's like wall jumping up the tower to get to the Joker and all that. I wanted something along those lines. So here, the nerd's wall jumping, but also you got to bring in those nerd references. And we had never, in the earlier games, had any references to big rigs. So we have the truck from Big Rigs come in, and it, swoops across the screen. And then as you go later, it goes in the other direction. So I think it's a really funny nerd reference. Plus, it has a lot of those gameplay mechanics that I really like. So it sort of combined the best of both worlds there. So probably the biggest change and most important thing to me with this deluxe version is the new final boss that's at the end of the tower. I always felt that this character should have been there in the original games. So I think it's more fitting, and it brings a better closure to the overall, arc of, both games plus the tower.
Why is AVGN 1 and 2 Deluxe the definitive version of these games?
So the new deluxe version, I think, is definitely the best version of the game, because you get more of a complete picture of, what the Angry Video Game Nerd is all about. Combining all the, show references from the first game and the second game, and now, with the final tower, it's like you're getting just so much more that I feel like this is like the true game, the one that you're getting now. It's like everything combined into one.
Because it takes all the great things about the first game and the second game, brings them together in one package, and adds a third and final chapter. It's on all of the consoles, Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo. It's on stores that look like they're gonna last for years. So I think what we did was we took games that were on consoles that had stores that are closed and gone, and we kind of brought it up to the point where it's going to last a long time, and people are going to be able to enjoy it for years to come.
This game is the definitive version because we put deluxe in the title. That's how you know. But no, seriously, it's cross-platform. It's going to be for all these systems and stuff like that. There's going to be a lot of updates coming for it and things like that. It's definitely the ultimate nerd experience, as we've been saying.
So where do we go from here? What's next for the pixelated nerd?
There's going to be another patch that comes out for all the consoles. It's going to have some quality of life improvements in it. There's some minor adjustments to some of the game physics, like the jumping has been a little bit improved. The big one is we're putting the collectibles right on the menu screen, so you're going to be able to see whether or not you've got all the future nerds in a level. That was a very requested one.
So with the new patch, what we want to do is go in and make it so that you can see all the shit pickle collectibles on the map, and the other collectibles that the nerd has, like the glove and the cape and all that, so that when you're on the main overworld map, you'll be able to know which stages you need to go back to or whatnot. And there's a lot of ideas that we're going to have, going forward for a new game, hopefully, but we'll get into that, later.
I've pitched ideas. I have pitched some ideas. Suffice to say, the ending of the Tower of Torment was written based on ideas that we've been pitching. The reason the nerd ends up where he does is to prepare for something else.
Of course, they've been kicking around the idea of a third game, like a completely new AVGN game. I don't know if it'd be AVGN 3 or something completely different, but we'll see what happens.
And then, we're going to start working on new projects, and you may be able to come back to the world of AVGN someday in the future, but we're going to hold that off for a future announcement. We also have some standees for some of our other games behind me. Right now, Screenwave's working on Lume, The Shifting Void. We're working on a Contra side-scrolling shooter called Iron Meat. We're working on a gigantic expansion to a game we put out last year called Eagle Island Twist. And we're working on a bunch of other projects we can't tell you about today.
I'm overjoyed that this got made, because look, the original game was great and I enjoyed it so much making it, and I was so proud of it, and the second one as well. Knowing that these are finally coming out, it's the best. It's the best feeling, and I'm so pleased to finally bring AVGN 2 to people that haven't played it. But not only that, but to bring the definitive version of the first game and new content as well. That's awesome, and I'm indebted to Screenwave and Cinemassacre for making this happen with me.
And I know earlier I called Sam Beddoes an asshole. I apologize for that, I guess. But you know, he's a pretty good guy, and I'm really glad he was given the opportunity to remake the games in his vision. And you know, like you can see the one time we were at PAX promoting the game, and James was there and Sam was there, and Sam was showing him the game, like the new builds and stuff, and just the look on his face, like Sam Beddoes was so ecstatic having James check it out, you know, because it's kind of like his love letter to the series. So having his having James play the games with him and shit was pretty cool to watch, I guess.
It's been a lot harder work, but it's been more rewarding than I think any of us were expecting going in. What we thought was going to be a pretty simple job to just combine two games really turned into sort of a reevaluation and a re-celebration of what those games accomplished, which we're all really happy about. We're happy that this content is getting back out there. We're happy that more people are seeing stuff from the second game. We're happy that Sam has been able to show off how much better his game design chops have gotten over the years in, you know, a product that you can buy.
It was really fun being creative with Mike on this project. A lot of what we do is reviews, or we're talking about games and things like that. But we don't really have the opportunity to do a lot of creation. But sitting down and working on the final tower, working on some of the changes to the enemies like the bloodstained bears and other things like that, we don't really have the opportunity to do that much, and it was a lot of fun. And you know, working together on that. I'd love to work with Mike more on stuff like that.
I think it's the perfect thing to be made into a video game, considering what it is. And I never thought it would really get to where it is. You know, in an indie game or something, you know, I can imagine, but the fact that it's on Nintendo Switch and PlayStation 4 and Xbox and all this, I never thought it would like really get, you know, to be that big of a thing. So I have to thank the fans so much for, you know, being that interested and invested in it. And it's been awesome. I mean, you know, people ask me all the time, they're like, what's it like to, you know, be in a video game? Is it cool? And it's like, yeah, it is cool. It's weird and it's cool. And it's awesome. You know, and I'm really thankful.
So that's the story of AVGN 1&2 Deluxe. A lot of people worked really hard on it, from Cinemassacre, Screenwave, FreakZoneGames, and we're all glad that you've been enjoying it. And now I'm gonna conquer the hard as balls mode. I'm coming for you, rabbit!